So good morning, all. Thank you very much for joining us today to have a chat about all things expedition cruising with Coral Expeditions down in Tasmania. It's going to be the main focus of today's discussions. So Tassie, after the Kimberley, Tasmania is probably our second most important domestic region that we cruise in. Basically, we've got a beautiful series of 4 cruises we're going to touch on today. And we've got the lovely assistance of Steve and Anne, who are our guest lecturers, who I'll come on to shortly with a bit more of an in-depth introduction. For those of you who have cruised with Coral Expeditions before, you'll be aware of the style of expedition travel that we offer and certainly the onboard experience. But for those of you who are potentially new to Coral, either you've booked on this Tassie cruise or are considering doing so, I just wanted to give a very brief overview of the style of travel that Coral Expeditions have been kind of delivering now for close to 40 years. So on the screen, for almost 4 decades, Coral has operated with that single purpose to take small groups of like-minded explorers to some of the most remote places that Australia and the Asia-Pacific region have to offer, and crucially with expert guidance and warm Australian hospitality. So what is the expedition experience with Coral? So it doesn't matter if you're cruising in the Kimberley, in Tasmania, in PNG, in Micronesia, and beyond. We deliver and offer exactly the same kind of onboard experience. We are owned, flagged, and operated by Australians, with a few Kiwis scattered amongst them, and we provide that really classic kind of laid-back, informal Australian style of hospitality and onboard experience. We encourage you to interact with our, the crew on board, be they expedition leaders, guest lecturers. You're welcome to jump up onto the bridge whenever you want to have a bit of an interaction with the captain and the crew. And we've got loads of both interior and exterior areas to kind of sit back and relax and enjoy the vistas on offer, basically. If you are looking for an onboard experience of casinos, nightclubs, white jacketed waiters, that's just not what Coral. That's not what the Coral product is. Basically, we run a full schedule of guest lectures and presentations specific to the areas in which you travel, and obviously Steve and Anne will come on to that in a little bit more detail. But the whole Coral ethos is to take you guys as our guests to some really remote, hard to access, if not impossible to access by road, and to immerse our guests in the flora, fauna, communities, cultures, geology of the areas in which we travel. So we have our expedition leaders on board, and then we have our guest presenters or guest lecturers on board as well. And it's their job to run our daily shore excursions and to, like I say, provide that kind of enriching educational onboard experience. Some of our guides, so Steve and Anne, have been cruising with us down in Tasmania for the last 5 seasons. But some of our guides have been with the company now for decades and provide that level of expertise and knowledge that Coral is known for providing. So we come on to probably our greatest point of difference between Coral Expeditions and any other global or domestic cruise line out there. And if you take away anything from this presentation at all, it's these, our Explorer tenders. They are designed and built and unique to Coral Expeditions, and they provide the perfect conduit across all of our fleet, no matter the Kimberley, Tasmania and beyond. They provide that perfect conduit between our kind of mothership and these epic, remote wilderness destinations in which we cruise. Some of the key points are that we can on and off board our entire ship's complement very quickly and easily on a level deck, basically, and then the explorers are gently lowered into the water. So particularly for the demographic that we appeal to, it's a flat, easy walk onto the explorers. And then we use them, like I say, to provide that conduit between the ship and these beautiful destinations we cruise in. They've got a roof on board, crucial in places like the Kimberley for the hot tropical sun. Probably less so for Tasmania, but it will keep the sun off, it keeps the rain off. We've got a full intercom system, so your expedition leader can keep you guys as our guests fully informed as we go. It's comfy padded seats. They're absolutely ideal as a scuba and snorkel platform for wet and dry beach landings, for rock landings, for harbour landings. We've got a toilet on board as well, which doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you can imagine, going away on 2, 3, 4 hour shore excursions, it just avoids the necessity to keep returning to the mothership for regular toilet breaks, which is going to really affect the overall expedition experience. So they're the perfect way that we can deliver this expedition product. But it's also important to know that we run our Zodiac inflatables alongside our Explorer tenders. Okay, so your clients can get the full expedition experience, and they can stay in the relative comfort of the Explorers, or they can jump aboard our Zodiacs where applicable. So onto the ship. Obviously, the Coral Fleet is 3 vessels purpose built to sail in these kind of remote waters that we primarily operate in. For the cruises, the cruise series that we're going to be talking about today, Coral Discoverer is going to be the ship that you guys are all going to be aboard. It's our smallest vessel. We describe it as our kind of most yacht-like vessel. It's got a maximum capacity of 72 guests on board. And for those of you who are joining Coral after cruising with us previously, you might well have been on board. It's really popular with our returning guests, mostly due to its size and its personal taste. But if I'm heading down to the remote wilds of Port Davey or beyond, I want to experience it in the lowest possible numbers. Our 2 more recent additions to the fleet have a maximum of 120, but Coral Discoverer is the ship that we use, like I say, for the Tasmanian season. Maximum 72 guests on board at any time. All of our cabins are outward facing and en suite. A number of them have private balconies as well. And yeah, CD, very much the ship that we're going to be utilising across the Tasmanian season. So before I hand over to Anne and Steve, we've got 4 itineraries to talk about today. The 2 main ones are our coastal treks of Tasmania and the coastal wilds of Tasmania. Both 10 nights, both Hobart to Hobart, both departing in January. Coastal treks in January each year, and then the coastal wilds in January and February each year, so the height of the Tasmanian summer. We're going to go through them today, both utilising both kind of cruise itineraries together. As you can see from the map, we visit all the same major destinations, with the major difference being that the coastal treks of Tasmania are built around some kind of significant day hikes, whereas the coastal wilds, we still go to Port Davies and Bruny Islands and Wineglass Bays, and we still get obviously the chance to do your 2 shore excursions. But rather than those kind of big, solid, quite chunky day hikes, which are designed for our kind of guests that have the physical capacity to get the most out of them, the coastal wilds goes to the same places, but not built around those pretty chunky day hikes. But again, Steve and Anne will go into a little bit more detail. So if you've joined us on the PNG and Micronesia webinar last week, Steve and Anne kindly joined us there to provide a bit of local expertise. But Tassie, like I say, they've been cruising with us for the last 5 seasons. They're part of our guest lecturer team on board. And I'll hand you over to them just to run through some of the highlights that are applicable to both these itineraries. Some are unique, obviously, just to coastal trekking, but Anne and Steve will clarify that. And then we've got a beautiful 16-night circumnavigation of Tasmania, which I'll come on to shortly. So over to you guys, Anne and Steve, onto the next slide, and we'll just have a run through of some of the highlights. Over to you.
Okay, well, we're sort of summer Tasmanians these days. We love to go down there throughout the summertime, and we do some volunteer work down there with some threatened species, including the Tasmanian devil and the orange-bellied parrot, which is one of the most threatened species in the world. We also do some work volunteering as campground hosts. So with a background in national parks, we sort of we're semi-retired, but we like to do the same sort of thing we used to do, only without the too much of the paperwork behind it. Is there anything else you want to say there?
What she said.
Okay, next slide, thanks. So first of all, with these two tours, in fact, all of them in Tasmania, you get to see that Tasmania has still got some incredibly pristine areas, and in particular the Tasmanian wilderness area and the captains do their level best to get us out to Port Davey, where you can experience just a magnificent part of Tasmania.
So you're looking, that's probably what a medium walk, when what Will was saying before, and we back that up totally. The coastal treks does have a couple fairly steady, like day-long walks, but this one you'll do on both of them, and so that gives you a bit of an idea. Now there'll always be alternatives offered if you don't want to do the serious walk. There's often a simpler walk somewhere or a cruise, but it probably does. You do need to think about focus. If you're on the coastal treks, your focus would be on walking. We do less presentations and less. We try and get people out and walking as much as we can, as opposed to the other ones which are slightly more relaxed. Bathurst Harbour, just quickly here. We won't answer questions. We won't give you too many facts, but just probably maybe give you a few hooks. As well as being very remote here, it's got a unique ecosystem due to the overlay of dark tannin water, which has a fresh water over salt water, and it completely changes the marine biology there. So that's something you can look forward to learning about, but it's very unique. Yeah. Thanks, Will.
So the history of Tasmania is laden with the convict history. We also like to talk a lot about the Palawa story, which is, although a lot of the history books still say it isn't ongoing, it certainly is. And here you can see a bit of Port Arthur and Maria Island.
So again, a little, you may well know a lot about the convict system, reputedly draconian, cruel, and there were some aspects of it, but also were there some aspects that were visionary? Were people who came as convicts able to progress through society far more than they ever would have at home? This is another aspect that we'll cover on these trips. Thanks.
The wildlife is really something that we focus on the trips. Bird life throughout the trip, and we'll get you up as close and personal as we can to some of the Australian and New Zealand fur seals without disturbing them. And the two bottom photos are on Maria Island, which is literally dripping with wildlife, and we'll cover that a little more later on.
Yeah, and again, the wildlife aspect of Tassie, I think, is undersold. It is quite unique. There are species there, such as the apex predators like Tassie devil and one of the quolls, which don't exist anymore on the mainland. There's a suite of animals that are bigger, like wedge-tailed eagles, platypus, echidna. The echidna is hairier. There's only 3 snakes there, and these are all due to the environment. Once again, we don't have time to go into it, but this is just a little hook, some of the things we will be talking about. Yes, Anne.
And for bird watchers, 12 endemic species only found in Tasmania that we see most of those.
Thanks, Will.
And you also get an opportunity to taste some of Tasmania's food and wine. So Coral Expeditions is linked up with a couple of sites around the place where you can they can select from for you to have that experience on those trips.
So this occurs on board as well with the wonderful menus that our chefs do. That the Coral Discoverer is actually called the Calorie Discoverer, but you also get the chance to go on shore on location to visit some of the renowned places in Tassie. Thanks.
So now on to some of the specific sites that we go to on these two expeditions. So for boat enthusiasts, the Wooden Boat Centre in Franklin is a real favourite, and we get to go on a tour through there. And while we're there, most people go across and sample some of the apple cider at one of the spots across the road.
And it's also a good entry. Like Tasmania's, like most of Australia, got several eras of history, and this is an into the pining industry, the amazing Huon pine, and its importance as a building material. This venue here highlights it really, really well. Thank you.
So Maria Island, just mentioned it briefly before, iconic for the convict history, which is different to Port Arthur and a great story to tell, but also, as I said, dripping with wildlife. The wombats, for example, there don't know that they're meant to be nocturnal, so on most visits there you get to see the wombats, and it's just you come away there with your heart filled with the excitement of seeing wildlife up close and personal.
And Maria's got an amazing history as an island ark. There's animal species being put there for their protection for decades, and the latest being the Tasmanian devil, to make sure there's a refuge population that can perhaps be taken back. So there's that side of things as well, which is really, really intriguing.
This is where we do our volunteer work with the Tasmanian devils. Yep. So it's a place that's close to our hearts.
Thanks, Phil.
Now, the Bishop and Clark walk is one of the 2 major walks that you only do on the Coastal Treks tour. It's quite a quite a difficult climb. I mean, it's not horrendously difficult, and you can also do it to different levels, right up to climbing up on top of this particular little precipice and celebrating your journey. So that's on Maria Island, and yeah, as I say, one of the points of difference with the Coastal Treks walks, as Steve said, you get to do some quite medium length walks on both of those cruises. But there'll be just this stronger focus on doing some of the more challenging walks and more of the challenging walks on the Coastal Treks. But on both of the cruises, we'll look after people who just want to mosey around beaches or something a little bit less challenging.
And Mariah's really good for that because it's a very important tourist destination. It's got several options. Probably not a bad slide to just mention, if you've been on the Kimberley, you would have listened to us bang on about the tides. Well, the tides aren't the issue. They're not here in Tassie, it's the weather. So those people there could be nice and sunny. Half an hour later, they could be in the middle of a sleeting rain storm. So you get to experience all the elements that have made Tassie what it is, but you have to come prepared. That's what that means. So you come with layers, and off they come and on they go, several times during the day.
We've already had a question on the weather, Steve, but I'll come on to those at the end.
Right. No worries.
Yeah, I'll just say, having said that, the captains actually really use the peninsulas and the aspects of Tasmania to duck in and out of the heavier seas. So that's the way they work the itinerary. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Will. And Port Davey, Mount Beatty in Port Davey. That's one of the medium challenging walks that gets you into the wilderness area, so you can experience what Tasmania has to offer. Totally, Port Davey has got to be the highlight of the trip, and that's why they do their absolute best to get us in there and have an amazing time for usually 2 nights.
Thanks. And
Cape Hoy is the other walk that you do on the Coastal Treks tour that's not on any of the other expeditions. So it's got there and back, you go over 3,000 steps to be taken, but it's absolutely worth it. It's the most magnificent walk, and more long. Also, Tasmania is really well set up. Most of the really iconic walks are easy in that the paths are really well prepared, and the steps are really solid placed in. But yeah, you'll know you've got legs that night. But, yeah. Yep. Wineglass Bay, which is on the Freycinet National Park, the peninsula there, one of the most iconic walks of Tasmania. So that's offered on both of the expeditions. And but if you don't want to walk up to the top there and look down, you can go across the isthmus, which is that little gap of land you can just see there between the 2 sides of the peninsula, and have a little play on the beach. Some people actually get in the water, not me. I'm not a cold lover.
This is a good example of where the weather comes in, because we may come in from the Wineglass side, or we may drop off on the other side, walk over, get picked up. We might have to go and return from one side if the swell's too bad on the other side. So generally speaking, we get everywhere. We just have to juggle it around with the expedition team and the captain. Thanks.
Yep, so try to get people out on the kayaks. So this one's at Port Davey, and that's where you're most likely to get that opportunity. And it can be really special. Sometimes the water's as flat as anything, and you just see it reflected in the water. It's a really lovely experience. And you can get onto those kayaks just from the back of the ship, nice and easy to get in. And then they look after you with the Zodiac to make sure you're okay, and back on the ship.
Thanks.
So Cape Hoy, we already mentioned this walk, and you can see there one section where you're going down a lot of steps, about to come up a lot of more steps. But that's on the Forestier Peninsula, on the eastern side of the island, and of island of Tasmania, that is. And if you don't do the walk, you get to see the Cape Hoy from the water as well. So we always make sure that you get to see it. And this is part of the spectacular scenery along that eastern coast of Tasmania, where these dolerite columns have literally pushed up from under the sea. And it's features that people come from, geologists anyway, come from across the world to see.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Steve and Anne. So yeah, just to reiterate, the coastal wilds and the coastal trek, very, very similar itineraries. Just the coastal trek is kind of geared towards you guys, our guests, who want something a little bit more challenging in terms of the shore excursion. So if you've fancy those kind of longer day hikes and up to some pretty spectacular viewpoints, the coastal trekking itineraries are for you. But yeah, just to clarify that, you know, to get the most out of that itinerary, yeah, you need to get involved and do some pretty significant day hikes. Whereas the coastal wilds, we go to all the same locations and destinations, but it's just not built around those pretty chunky day hikes. Still the option, obviously, to walk and explore. But if you've got, you know, guests or you feel like you are the type of person that would like to undertake something a little bit more kind of strenuous, then the coastal trekking itineraries are going to be for you. If you've got a little bit of extra time, we do a 16-night full circumnavigation of Tasmania. Again, Hobart to Hobart, departing in January and February over the next couple of years. It's a really popular itinerary, always sells out with Coral Expedition. You can see from the map there that the kind of southeastern or south and southeastern sections are very, very similar to the coastal treks or coastal wild itineraries, just with the additional 6 nights tacked on. And again, Anne and Steve, over to you just to kind of highlight some of the highlights that we probably haven't covered already.
Okay, so Melaleuca is on all of the Hobart cruises as well. That's part of Port Davey, and we get up there on the Explorers and into this area, which is where the research is done on the orange-bellied parrots, and Steve and I have been involved in that as well. So you, if you're lucky, you get to see part of the very small population of orange-bellied parrots that still exist today, and which most of them breed right there at Melaleuca. It's also at the site of a very interesting history of a family, iconic family really for Tasmania.
Yeah, it's the King family, which the stories of these early tin miners is just mind-boggling. When they, especially in the early days when they did it all by hand and took tin out in little wheat bags. It's just an incredible story of strength, hardship, pioneering. And interestingly enough, this particular point, one of the main people, Denny King, as well as being a miner, was an amazing conservationist and artist, and it's due to him that the Southwest Tassie wilderness area, in part, was created, and also the focus on the orange-bellied parrot. So you don't often get miners and conservationists in the same bed. This is a good example where you do.
Not surprisingly, he's a very colourful character, so we love telling the stories of him and his sister. Yeah, I think.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's also a Indigenous walk there, which some people find really interesting. We certainly do. And then on the circumnavigation is where you get to go to Flinders Island, which is it's that particular walk that's shown there is just a feast of colour. On top of that, all of the bird life that you see, and you get to meet some of the local characters of Flinders Island as well, who join us.
Thanks, Dan.
Trousers Point.
So Tasmania is full of some really interesting place names, and this is on a walk called Trousers Point.
Steve said it was pants down.
Pants down, which is actually one of the stories where they think the story came from. And these lovely lichen-stained rock formations there as well. Flinders Island, named by Philip Gidley King after Matthew Flinders from the efforts he did with bass circumnavigating Tassie. Thank you.
And mentioned earlier these dolerite columns, but so this is what you would be looking at from the sea. And then there's an intriguing story about the particular pillars there that we tell you about on the trip. But it's just, you know, mind-boggling, these columns that 500 meters or more out of the water. Great geology story.
The other really interesting or good thing about that Tasmanian geology is, depending whether we go to Port Novi in the night or during the day, we'll go past Tasman Island and maybe Matsaika Island, and those geologically and ecologically are effectively sub-Antarctic islands. They're not really typical of the mainland, so there's just introduces a whole other dimension as well. Thanks.
And on that cruise, we also get around into the Tamar River, and another opportunity to get out on the kayaks if the water's nice and flat like that, which, you know, it's most likely to be in that protected area.
Thank you very much, guys. The final little cruise option I just wanted to tempt you guys with is our yachtsman's cruise, is what we call it. It's a fantastic way of relocating coral discoverer down the east coast and ready for the start of the Tasmanian season. We've been doing it for years now. It sells out absolutely year after year. If any of you listening have a bit of a interest in yachting, we call it the Yachtsman's Cruise for the obvious reason that we're following the start of the Sydney to Hobart. So your cruise departs in Sydney on Boxing Day. We follow the fleet out, getting, you know, stunning footage of some of the big yachts as they start their trip down across the Bass Strait. You know, the big super maxis, you know, fast outpaces pretty quickly. And then we basically cruise down across the Bass Strait on our way to Hobart. But yeah, it's called a Yachtsman's Cruise. Sells out every year, basically, and we operate it Boxing Day every year. Great way of getting the ship down there. But if you guys want to, you know, have a pre-yachting cruise prior to the start of coastal wilds or coastal trekking itineraries, then happy days. The option is there for you. I just wouldn't hang around too much to secure your cabin on CD for the Yachtsman's Cruise. Sells out absolutely every year. Thank you very much, guys, Anne and Steve, for just covering some of the highlights. My phone's been running hot and getting a few questions texted through. I forgot to mention, so for anybody listening today, please feel free to chuck a few questions into the chat function of your laptop or computer. If we can't get through all of them today, we'll reach out to you personally with an answer. But we'll just kick off a few questions. So straight away, some for you, Steve and Anne. We touched on some of these points a little bit during the presentation, but if you can just clarify as required. So question number one, are there many options for swimming and then in brackets kayaking? We appreciate the Tasmania, we go down there during the height of summer, but we all know what the Tassie weather can be like. But yeah, and maybe link swimming options to another question. What's the weather going to be like around that kind of January, February time?
Yeah, well, we say that the Tasmanian weather is, you know, you always say Melbourne, you know, 4 seasons in a day. Well, Tasmania, 4 seasons in an hour sometimes. So really unpredictable. Obviously, that time of year, it's more likely to be quite pleasant. But you do need to come with wet weather gear and something to, you know, wind jackets and then warm gear. You really, you know, especially on some of those longer walks, you know, it can be quite exposed out there. Having said that, it might be quite hot if the sun's out. So you can really experience the whole lot weather-wise. About the kayaking, we'd try to get the kayaks out at least once during the cruise. I'm not sure whether they get them out. We didn't get them out more on the
Fortescue and Port Davey usually.
But in the Tamar River on the circumnavigation. But it won't be every day. And with the swimming, there's a couple of times when you come back down off the walks. If you're feeling hot, you can have a quick dip. It's usually 2 to 3 people who are brave enough, and I'm not one of them. Neither Steve.
Yeah. So we don't hold an official like swimming activity, but a lot of the walks we do with very closely regulated in terms of numbers of people who can be on the site at once, and they usually have to have a certain ratio of guides. So sometimes there's an aspect of you're in the first group, you come back and you're waiting for the rest, and it scales from that, or you're waiting for the explorer to come get you, and there's usually plenty of opportunity for those who want to have a dip to hop in there, and some people do. Those hardy people, certainly local Tasmanians don't have a problem, but we live most of our career in the Northern Territory, so we doesn't, it's a bit too cold for us, but for those that are willing, wanting to do it, yeah, there's opportunity.
And Wineglass Bay is one of the favourite spots for people to try to jump in.
Thank you. And look, following on from that, guys, I've got one message just came to. What type of hiking focus is on the full circumnav compared to the shorter kind of focused itineraries?
So on all the trips, you get off the ship at least once, probably twice in the day, and there'll be walks available, and the walks will still be offered at various levels. So you know, it might be down to, you can just have a little look on the beach here. You might at Adventure Bay, for example, we just walk virtually across the road and around a museum, through to those medium level walks, and on the coastal treks, the hard level walks. So whatever your capability and your interests are, the expedition team caters for that. Some people also just stay on the Explorer sometimes. Not so much there as on the Kimberley, but you can, and also the Explorer, for example, in Port Davey is going for quite long trips to get to the to where we're going, and you could stay on the Explorer if that's all you want to do.
The walks on the circumnavigation are very similar to the coastal wilds. There might be
similar level, yeah,
and the same ones. You're not, you know, if you did the circumnavigation, you probably aren't missing too many walks that are done on the coastal wilds. You are missing those bigger ones that you do on the coastal treks.
Yeah, and then the additional ones on Flinders and wherever else they get to call in on.
And leading or segueing quite nicely into the next one, and again, you touched on this a couple of times already, but focusing on the coastal treks, how hard are these day hikes? You know, do you need full walking gear? Do you need walking poles?
Definitely recommend bringing your walking poles. I even use one on the Cape Hoy trek, and I don't use them anywhere else, just because it takes that pressure off your knees with all of those steps. It's great for balance, and some of the tracks are really a bit soggy, and so you know, you might find you occasionally sink down to your ankle in mud, and it's always good to have that extra little bit of balance. So I would recommend walking poles and hiking boots for sure. Yep, and you still need to bring some shoes that you can get off the ship get off the Explorer, sorry, into the water, in case because there are some wet landings on the beach. So you need some old shoes that you're okay to get wet, and some good hiking boots if you're going to be doing any of the medium to high level walks.
Sorry, carry on, Steve.
Oh, I was just going to say, in those cases, we always bring towels, and we get off onto the beach, and like the little diving type shoes are fine, sandals are fine usually, but then we'll get off and people have a chance to dry their feet, put their boots on. But absolutely, some of the walks are not formed, and they are uneven, and especially if it's been raining, which tends to happen in Tassie, you know, there can be. So yeah, definitely that extra support is pretty much essential, really. Yep.
Thongs, just don't bring thongs unless you want to wear them around the ship.
And let's segueing into that quite nicely again, guys. Wet and dry beach landings. There's going to be a mixture, but if you could just shed a little bit of light on those two, basically.
Yeah, this is on all our trips is a big topic of conversation. I'd say wet landing is where you have to get off the front, where the Explorer's got a drop door, like a ramp, and where we can, we'll nose up and get it onto dry ground. More of an issue in the Kimberley than Tassie, and Tassie's also generally quite nice, firm beaches. But you need to come expecting to maybe to be ankle to shin deep in water sometimes, as because the Explorer is 6 tons or something, and it doesn't. It's very shallow. It's just purpose built, but some places that can't get in right up, and we don't want to get stuck because then we're there for 6 hours. There are times we have to work with the conditions. So you get off, we'll be there we help people off and on. There's always a helping hand, even to walk people right into shore. And then you just change. And then some of our really short walk, or you might want just beach comb, which is fine too. But if you're going on those medium walks, then you change into your drier boots. So yeah, and then when we get back on board, you rinse them off to prevent fungus and weeds, and there's a rack you dry them on so they're dry, ready for next time. So
Thank you.
Helps.
And look, it's going to be very different, obviously, from our Kimberley kind of expedition product, which many of our guests here today might have already been on. But one of the questions was, what kind of expectations should there be for kind of Indigenous art and culture down in Tasmania? It's going to be less, I'm assuming, compared to the Kimberley. But if you could highlight that.
Yeah, most certainly less of exposure to Aboriginal cultural. We don't go to any of the rock art sites or the rock engraving sites. Not many of those are even available to visit. So it's a far less exposure to that. We personally are very interested in the Palawa, which is the Tasmanian name that the Aboriginal descendants now call themselves. We talk a lot about the Palawa history and culture. I don't know about the other guest lecturers, but it's something that we're very interested in. Not sure if that answers the question.
Well, yeah, we don't go to, if you want striking Aboriginal rock art, then you need to go to the Kimberley.
Yeah.
But there is an amazing Aboriginal history in Tasmania, particularly the survival aspects, and probably cover it. Like, we do a talk on it every trip with people. The talks we do are chosen by the expedition leader based on interests of guests and where we're going to make sure they're relevant. Certainly on the circumnavigation, where we're going through the Furneaux Group and to Flinders Island, which is where most mainland Tasmanian Aboriginal people were moved off, in places called Wibelina, which is a fairly shocking history. And sometimes when there, depends if they're available, a local Aboriginal representation may well give the talk instead of us, which is, of course, a great scenario for us all, as you learn. So it's certainly not as much a focus as Kimberley, but it's there, and it needs to be there, and it needs to be talked about and needs to be acknowledged.
Thank you very much, guys. A couple of questions that I can probably jump in and answer. So Wi-Fi networks, important for many people these days, whether or not you're cruising the remote Kimberley or down in Tassie. And the good news is, over the last 2 or 3 months, Coral have upgraded all of their fleet. So across all 3 ships of the Coral fleet, we now have Starlink on board, courtesy of the lovely Elon Musk, giving him lots more money in that regard. So the Wi-Fi is now superb. We include our standard Wi-Fi as an inclusion in the fare that you guys have already paid or potentially will pay. And from what I've been told, since it's been rolled out on the ships, that the Wi-Fi on board is now better than it is in the head office in Cairns. So in terms of streaming Netflix or whatever you want to do, Wi-Fi is now genuinely superb. There are small areas where even Starlink doesn't kind of cater to at the moment, but they tend to be more in international waters, sailing between PNG and Guam and places like that. But in Tassie, Wi-Fi included as standard. If you're looking to download and stream hours of Netflix content, not that you'll probably have the time, you'll probably need to upgrade to our premium package. But in terms of all your social medias and keeping in contact with friends and family, Wi-Fi is now excellent on board our vessels and included in our normal inclusions. Is the Coral, Tasmania being a focus, is it an all-inclusive product? Look, absolutely. So we market ourselves as a very premium all-inclusive product. So obviously all your food, alcoholic drinks are served during lunch and dinner service. Outside those hours, that would be an additional expense. But other than that, all your shore excursions, all your activities that we do, all included in the cost. Very rarely, like using the Kimberley as an example, we have an optional flight over Mitchell Falls, which is bookable and payable on board the vessel. It's nothing to do with coral expeditions, but 99% of the time it's a genuine all-inclusive experience outside of those drinks, outside of the lunch and dinner service. And I think we've covered most of the questions, guys, that have come through either pre-supplied or come through on my mobile whilst we've been chatting. So I'll probably just sum up by saying, so I've got another question. Do you mean there is a surcharge for Wi-Fi if premium speed? Yes, there will be. So your fare includes our standard Wi-Fi, like I say, which is more than adequate for social medias, posting, reading the news, that type of thing. If you are looking to download bigger files, movies, series, that type of thing, you would need to upgrade to our premium Wi-Fi offering. And then, like I say, whenever we've got my colleagues on board, they have a premium because they need access to Teams and Zoom calls, that type of thing. So if you're looking to work from the ship, I really hope you're not, but if you are looking to work, you'll probably be looking to upgrade to the premium onboard offer. But for anybody else who is just looking for social media, keeping in contact with friends and family, the included standard Wi-Fi should be more than enough. And with the Starlink, like I say, going active in the last 2 or 3 months across the fleet, our download speeds and connectivity are genuinely superb now. Like I say, higher speeds than the Cairns-based office at the moment. Cool. That should be it in terms of questions. Thank you very much to Steve and Anne again. Whilst I've been down to Tasmania, I certainly haven't visited all the major highlights on our cruise series. It's our second most popular destination domestically after the Kimberley. And if you've got an interest in the spectacular landscape, geology, sceneries, the wildlife, the flora and fauna of the areas that we cruise in Tasmania, hopefully one of those cruise series is going to be ideal for you. Please feel free to jump onto our website. It's genuinely excellent. I try and keep these webinars to a pretty short and brief 45 minutes. So we really are just touching on the main kind of key selling points and kind of highlights of the trips, but full itineraries, excuse me, videos, maps, itineraries, that type of thing available online. Loads of additional information on Coral Discoverer, the ship that we utilize down in Tasmania, from deck plans to additional videos, all that type of stuff. Please feel free to reach out to our genuinely excellent reservations team on the email and the number that's up on your screen. And likewise, reach out to any of us in the sales team. Again, all contact information live off the website. And look, hopefully for those of you who are already booked onto Tasmania, you'll be seeing Steve and Anne on board. Sadly not myself this time, but Steve and Anne will be there. And for those of you considering, potentially joining Coral down in Tasmania, I might be biased, Steve and Anne might be biased, but we have delivered that kind of true expedition product now for close to 40 years. We've been cruising in Tasmanian waters for years and years. Local expertise, like with the Kimberley, is really crucial to delivering a fantastic expedition product. And like I say, might be biased, but we offer a superb product down in Tasmania. If you've got 10 nights, coastal trek or coastal wild itineraries, depending on how adventurous and physical you want the trip to be. If you've got a little bit more time, then happy days, the 16-night full circumnavigation of Tasmania. You're going to see it all and sells out every year. And finally, if you've got an interest in yachting and sailing and want to start off your new year, on Boxing, sorry, not your new year, your Boxing Day in Sydney, to watch the Sydney Hobart fleet depart and follow them down, whilst get some of the southeastern highlights of Tasmania and arrive into Hobart, then the Yachtsman cruise could be the ideal product for you. Steve and Anne, thank you very, very much once again. I really appreciate your insights and taking the time out of your day to join us as well. And for anybody listening on board, if you're booked, I hope you have a fantastic trip. If you're hesitating, please feel free to reach out to us and we will more than happily get you reserved on board, and away you go. Thank you very much to all. Have a fantastic rest of your day, guys. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.